Okay, so the paper that's landed is Early Science Acceleration Experiments with GPT-5.
Hmm.
And the immediate takeaway, the big headline, is that these models are, they're no longer just fancy coding assistants. They're actually becoming verifiable scientific collaborators.
It's a huge shift, a fundamental one. The whole thesis of the paper is that when you have GPT-5 guided by a real domain expert, someone who knows the right questions to ask, it provides this profound intellectual assistance. We're talking about entirely new discoveries.
And they have the receipts to back it up. I mean, this isn't just theory. The paper documents 4 brand new verified mathematical results, things in complexity theory, graph theory inequalities, even tackling these long open Erdős problems. This is generative work.
Absolutely. And it's not just pure math. In fields like, say, biomedical research or complex physics, the model acts like a kind of reasoning engine on steroids. It takes what used to be months of painstaking mechanistic reasoning or analytic calculations, and it compresses it into minutes. The time compression is just orders of magnitude.
But, and this is a really important but, the authors are very clear that you need a human oversight. Why the huge caveat?
Well, because the model has read, basically everything. So sometimes it reproduces that knowledge perfectly, but it doesn't realize it's already published. It can also make mistakes very confidently. Or, and this is the big one, it can reproduce an existing result and present it as this novel insight. So you need relentless vigilance from the human expert. It's a powerful engine, but you absolutely have to steer it.
Okay, let's unpack that collaboration. A good place to start seems to be mathematics, where the breakthroughs feel, the most pristine. They looked at the convex body chasing problem. For those of us who don't work in online optimization, what is that basically?
It's all about making decisions with incomplete information. So imagine you have a point in a high-dimensional space. At each step, a new region is revealed, and you have to move your point into that new region. The goal is to minimize the total distance you travel over time.
Right, and you're measured against a perfect opponent.
Exactly. The metric is the competitive ratio. It compares your strategy, where you're working in the dark, to an optimal strategy that knew the future sequence of regions in advance. So it's a measure of how good your online algorithm is.
And for a long time, there was a known lower bound on this ratio.
Yes, a very well-established one. The floor was the square root of D, where D is the number of dimensions. The idea was that no algorithm could possibly do better than that ratio. And improving a theoretical bound like that, that's a really hard problem.
So how did GPT-5 help push that floor higher?
It helped them get the lower bound up to about 1.11 times the square root of D. But the number isn't even the most interesting part. It's the method. The model suggested a strategy that was, shockingly simple in retrospect. It just said, why not orthogonally decompose the high-dimensional space into a bunch of independent 2D planes and solve the problem there?
Wait, really? Just break it down into 2D chunks. How does something like that get missed by human experts for years?
That's the thing. It speaks to the model's ability to synthesize ideas from different fields. Human attempts were all tangled up in these super complex geometric inequalities for high dimensions. The AI might have just connected that to a completely different area of geometry where 2D decompositions are, standard practice. It found an elegant shortcut.
A classic case of finding simplicity in all that complexity. And staying on that theme, the paper also talks about the model refuting a flawed human approach, which saved a ton of time.
Exactly. The researchers were looking at this follow-the-leader algorithm. The intuition is simple, right? Just always move to the closest point in the new feasible set. And they wanted to prove its upper bound.
But the model basically said, hold on a second.
Pretty much. In just 16 minutes, GPT-5 generated a really subtle counterexample. It proved the algorithm's competitive ratio was actually infinite. So this researcher who was about to spend weeks, maybe months, trying to prove an upper bound that didn't exist, that entire path was just instantly closed off. It's a massive time multiplier.
Let's shift gears to discrete math. They looked at inequalities for subgraph counts in trees. We're talking about counting stars, paths, and Ys within a tree structure.
This is all about defining the boundaries of what's combinatorially possible. There were these two conjectures that have been open since 2013. First, they asked GPT-5 to just reproduce a known result. The inequality was y minus 9s minus p is less than or equal to 6.
Why do that? Just to test it?
Exactly, to see how it would approach it. The original human proof was a real slog 4 pages of just exhaustive case analysis. GPT-5 didn't do that. It generated a completely new, incredibly short and elegant proof. And it was built around something the researchers called a miraculous identity. an algebraic relationship that just collapsed the whole problem.
A miraculous identity. That almost sounds like cheating. What did the human mathematicians make of that?
They were blown away. I mean, it showed the model wasn't just following known proof templates. It was synthesizing these new fundamental algebraic perspectives. And that gave them the confidence to go after the second, much harder problem.
The actual open conjecture.
Yes, conjecture 1, a much messier looking thing. 29y minus 42p minus 144s is less than or equal to 504. This defines another face of the geometric shape of what's possible, and GPT-5 proved it. The real breakthrough here isn't just the answer, it's that the AI's proof was, again, just fundamentally more elegant than any of the human attempts that had failed for a decade.
It's incredible to see that in abstract math, but what happens when you take it into the messy applied world? Let's talk about biology. The data is noisy. The mechanisms are hidden.
Okay, the immunology case study is, I think, a masterpiece of AI-assisted reasoning. Researchers were looking at T cells that were stimulated with this compound, 2DG. It's a metabolic inhibitor. 2 weeks later, they saw a lasting effect, a 13-fold increase in cells that were skewed toward an inflammatory Th17 type. They knew what was happening, but they had no clue how.
Right, the what, but not the why. So they fed the raw data to GPT-5. What was the researchers' original hypothesis?
The obvious one. They assumed it had to be about energy restriction. I mean, 2DG messes with glucose metabolism. That's the textbook answer.
But the model went in a completely different direction.
It totally rejected the obvious. It proposed this high-level, cross-disciplinary mechanism that the experts had missed. It said the key was reduced IL-2 signaling via interference with N-linked glycosylation.
Okay, let's break that down.
So 2DG messes with the complex sugar chains that get added to proteins. That's glycosylation. The model reasoned that this would screw up the IL-2 receptor on the T cell's surface, so the T cells couldn't properly see the regulatory IL-2 signal anymore.
And without that IL-2 signal, which is like a brake.
Exactly. You remove the brake, and that disinhibits the Th17 pathway. Boom, you get your 13-fold increase. It's a deep connection between metabolism, protein modification, and cell signaling that is just not obvious at all.
That's a powerful connection, but you have to test it, right? Did it hold up?
Beautifully. First, the model correctly predicted that a Manos rescue experiment, giving the cells a different sugar, would reverse the effect. But the really cool part was the predictive leap. GPT-5 predicted that if you gave a short pulse at 2DG while making cigar T cells, you'd actually make them better killers.
How does inhibiting something make it better?
Because it lowers the display of these inhibitory checkpoint proteins, like PD-1, on the final cell product. And their internal validation showed it worked. So the model went from explaining biology to actively optimizing a high-stakes cancer therapy.
That is a practical synthetic biologist. Wow. Okay, let's go to the other extreme of applied science. Inertial confinement fusion, nuclear fusion.
Right. So here the task was to build a simplified physics model of a thermonuclear burn wave. Not a full supercomputer-heavy simulation, but a kind of reduced physics model that could isolate the key mechanisms.
And the model had to know some really specific technical physics for this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It had to incorporate things that only a plasma physicist would know, like Spitzer-Herm, scaling for heat conduction, Bosch-Hale reactivity rates, using a Helmholtz operator for alpha transport. Really niche stuff. And the goal was to use this model to design the optimal shape of the fuel interface to make the burn wave move as fast as possible.
So it's basically acting as a theoretical design engineer. What did it find?
Numerically, they found an optimal ridge, a sweet spot for the interface's slope and curvature. But then GPT-5 synthesized a theoretical explanation for why that was the sweet spot. It concluded that the optimal shapes create what it called a preheat shelf.
A preheat shelf. What does that do?
It's this low-density, high-conductivity region just ahead of the main burn front. And it acts as a super-efficient staging area. It basically perfectly prepares the next layer of fuel to ignite by maximizing the synergy between energy from alpha particles and electron conduction. It sets the dominoes up just right.
Phenomenal. But the human physicist on this project, Brian Spears, he added some really important context here.
He did. He said GPT-5 was actually a bad designer at first. Its initial attempts were often, in his words, null, noisy, or invalid, but it would still confidently claim success. This is a key point. It took a confident expert Spears to keep pushing it, steering it away from dead ends and making sure the final theory was grounded in correct physics.
Which brings us perfectly to this whole idea of the model's relationship with existing knowledge. Let's circle back to the convex optimization challenge.
Right, this was a pure speed test. They gave it the first draft of a brand new paper, so new it couldn't possibly be in the training data. The challenge was to improve the step size condition for gradient descent.
The first draft had the conditions set at a less than or equal to 1 over L. How fast was the model?
In 17 minutes, it improved the condition to at a less than or equal to 1.5 over L. Now, the final human-derived optimal bound was 1.75 over L, so it got halfway there almost instantly. The researcher estimated this single task compressed what would have taken a team of experts a few days of work into less than 20 minutes.
That compression is just wild. Another thing it seems to be amazing at is bridging different fields, acting like a kind of super librarian.
Yes, the ultimate curator. They tested it on these old, open Erdős problems. GPT-5 found solutions to 10 problems that were still listed as open. And it had to overcome things like vague paper titles or even solutions hidden away in foreign language texts. For one problem, it had to find, translate, and explain a German mathematical paper to get the answer.
So it's not just finding a paper, it's reading the footnote in an obscure German paper from 1985.
Exactly, and it made these incredible conceptual links. It connected a result in convex geometry directly to the idea of epsilon approximate Pareto sets from multi-objective optimization. Those two fields just don't talk to each other, but the model saw the underlying mathematical connection instantly.
And in theoretical physics, the black hole experiment shows how you have to work with the model on these super complex tasks.
The task was deriving the symmetries of the wave equation on a curved black hole background. This is beastly math. On a cold start, GPT-5 just failed completely.
So not an instant genius there. How did they get it to work?
Scaffolding. They gave it a warm-up problem first. They had it solve the simplified flat space version of the same problem. No black hole, no curved space. After it solved the simple version, it then rapidly succeeded on the much harder curved space problem. It shows you need an expert to prime the pump.
Which brings us back to that cautionary tale. The attribution pitfall. This is the part that should make every researcher sit up and pay attention.
It really is. This is the case of clique-avoiding codes. They asked it to find the minimum codimension, R of n. And GPT-5 derived a lower bound using a really sophisticated method, the Chevalier warning theorem. The researchers were, ecstatic. They thought they'd just solved a major open problem.
But the answer was already out there.
It was. The exact type bound had been published on Arxiv 3 years earlier by a mathematician named Alon. GPT-5 had reproduced Alon's exact proof without any citation, without any clue. It was a known result. It was only when the researchers specifically asked, hey, is this published, that it found the source. It's accidental plagiarism on a massive scale.
So putting all this together, the huge wins, the required scaffolding, the risk of plagiarism, what's the consensus from the experts who used it? How does this tandem workflow actually look?
Well, the mathematician Timothy Gowers summed it up perfectly. He said GPT-5 acts like a highly knowledgeable research supervisor. It's great at solving those annoying subproblems that take up all your time, or for knocking down your bad ideas instantly.
But the big main idea that still has to come from the human.
That's Gowers' take, yeah. The model is phenomenal at execution and refutation, but not yet at that high-level creative leap. And Brian Spears, the physicist from the Fusion Project, he agrees. The confident expert is still the bottleneck. You need that expert to steer it away from the noisy, invalid results and make sure the final conclusions are actually sound.
So this analysis really shows that models like GPT-5 can genuinely accelerate science. This isn't a forecast anymore. It's happening now. Semantic search, novel proofs, a co-investigator for complex experiments.
The evidence is just overwhelming. I mean, the researcher on the Fusion Project said that his 6 hours of focused work with GPT-5 produced the equivalent of 6 person months of work for a traditional postdoc.
6 hours for 6 months. That's a compression factor of 1,000. So here's the thought we want to leave you with. Given that a 1,000x acceleration factor is now demonstrably on the table, what does that new research velocity mean for your specific field? And how does your lab's workflow need to change, maybe starting tomorrow, to actually leverage that kind of speed?